I knew the knife was in my back the moment Austin stepped into the server room with that smug smile and an HR rep trailing him like a bad smell. He didn't shake my hand, didn't even look me in the eye, just dropped a red folder on my desk like it was a pizza menu. "Effective immediately," he said, like he'd been practicing it in the mirror. "We're restructuring. You'll hand over the controls." I stared at him for a beat too long. Not because I was surprised, but because I was savoring the sound of his own noose tightening. You don't rip the spine out of a system you don't understand. And Austin Ray didn't understand anything beyond buzzwords and whatever PowerPoint poison his B-school professors fed him. The fool thought replatforming was just a click and drag operation. Thought migrating Trendcore's ops architecture, which I had coded, encrypted, modularized, and secured across 6 platforms over 7 years, was as simple as changing a desktop wallpaper. I didn't say any of that. I just smiled, slid my badge across the desk, and gave him 6 words I'd kept in my back pocket for years. "I'm afraid I can't do that." His pupils shrank. The HR rep coughed, and I stood, removed the auth token from my lanyard, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out, calm, precise, deliberate. Because that's what you do when the building is already burning and no one else smells smoke. Hey, if you're still listening and enjoying the story so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you think, and it seriously keeps this kind of storytelling going. Only about 3% of listeners are subscribed, and your support means the world to us. All right, back to it. Trendcore Systems didn't just run on tech, it was tech. Every warehouse manifest, every logistics node, every client integration pinged through my ops core. I'd built it to scale quietly, to survive leadership fads and funding cycles. Not to be sexy, to work. When the previous CTO offered me a permanent executive title, I declined. Asked instead to remain a retained contractor through my holding firm, Stonelight Ops LLC. That way, the core stayed legally mine. They needed me, but they didn't know how much. Then came Austin, and the founder's blind spot for nepotism. See, it wasn't just that Austin was arrogant, it's that he was loud about it. In his second week, he replaced our global compliance checklist with a Notion template called Speedboat Ops. Fired the guy who managed API rollbacks because he didn't like pessimistic energy. He gave a town hall presentation titled Why Ops Should Be Invisible, which was funny, considering my architecture ran every revenue-facing function Trendcore had. I gave him 3 warnings: quiet, professional, documented. First, you're proposing to rehost a hybrid licensed control core without examining the embedded IP structure. He said, we'll just rewrite it. Second, the architecture includes secure elements licensed under a non-transferable clause. He replied, legal's already on it. Third, cutting me out could trigger latent failsafes, not malice, just protocol. He laughed. Then we'll remove the protocols. So when he showed up with that folder, that effective immediately attitude, I wasn't blindsided. I was waiting. It's funny. You spend years doing quiet, invisible work, optimizing background syncs, refining predictive caching, negotiating API handoffs down to the millisecond, and people start believing it's easy, like it just exists, until you're gone, and the lights don't come back on. That morning, the ops dashboard showed green across the board, but I knew the second I pulled my token, the core would begin its decay. Slowly, quietly. First the overnight batch jobs, then the partner syncs. Then, within 48 hours, inventory drift and SLA breaches. Austin didn't understand the timing. He thought he'd fired an engineer. What he'd done was remove the keystone holding the cathedral together, and he was about to learn what happens when that stone drops. Austin didn't waste time pretending to learn the system. He just decided to bulldoze it. Day 1 of his ops modernization initiative, he started carving teams into little agile pods like we were a Silicon Valley coffee startup, not a billion-dollar logistics backbone with half our architecture older than his TikTok history. The man walked around like he was going to manifest cloud migration with positive energy and recycled buzzwords. I watched him flip through diagrams I'd built over 7 years and reduce them to sticky notes labeled Replace W SAS. The next all-hands meeting, he introduced the plan like a TED Talk dropout. We're going full cloud native, he beamed, like the phrase alone would make the servers levitate. No more legacy duct tape. We're streamlining, consolidating, modernizing. A few heads nodded, mostly the ones trying not to get cut. But behind him, the infrastructure diagrams glitched on the screen because the ops layer he was mocking was still doing its job in real time. He said we'd migrate to Quoranet, a third-party suite that promised everything from API routing to billing sync. Said their sales engineer guaranteed seamless transition. I nearly choked. You don't migrate a custom-welded hybrid control plane that wraps around 5 licensing layers, internal VPNs, and an inventory backbone patched through regional hubs in 30 days with a goddamn checkbox on a proposal form. I told him, plain as day, you're not just moving tech, Austin. You're cutting wires that wrap around live revenue, and you're missing a license chain that doesn't belong to Trendcore. He gave me that half smile like I was a toddler interrupting adults. Legal's reviewing now. If it's in your contract, they'll flag it. What he didn't know, because he never bothered to read anything beyond his email subject lines, was that the license for the architectural core sat under Stonelight Ops LLC, mine, not Trendcore's, not the CTO's. Approved under CTO David Curie 6 years and 2 reorgs ago, buried in Clause 9C of my retainer renewal. All architectural IP remains property of consultant unless transferred via mutual dissolution. No one had dissolved anything. No one had even asked. The newer legal team didn't catch it because they were looking for purchase agreements, not absence of transfer clauses. That's the thing about contracts. What's missing is sometimes louder than what's there. And Austin? He thought words like core access were metaphors, not certificate-enforced protocols. He said we'd just rewrite the whole thing. Rewriting ops code you didn't write is like trying to reassemble a watch blindfolded, with half the gears encrypted and the other half patented. He began streamlining by letting go of systems folks who actually understood how the billing logic reconciled across our customer portals. Said he'd outsource complexity. When the partner API lead pushed back, Austin told her to start thinking future first. She quit that night. That week, he shut down the legacy queue manager and tried to route everything through the dev sandbox. We lost 2 hours of transaction sync in the Midwest and a half-day's shipping update in Prague. Still, he refused to admit it. Said it was expected turbulence, like he was piloting a jet through code and not dismantling the engine mid-air. Every time I brought up the hybrid licensing structure, he nodded like he was pretending to understand and moved on. He thought saying, "we'll refactor," was a strategy. It was a death sentence for the system, for him. I started watching with detachment, not out of spite, just clarity. I'd warned him. I'd documented the constraints. I'd kept my tone flat and my emails clean. But the deeper he cut, the more silent switches he flipped, and the closer he got to finding out that the very thing he was trying to replace wasn't his to touch. And by the time he reached for it, it would already be too late. It was raining that Tuesday. I remember that much. One of those Ohio autumn mornings where the sky feels like concrete and the coffee tastes like cardboard. I was in the server room early, as usual, running integrity checks on the sync layer. Just routine. Quiet hum of the racks, status lights flickering like fireflies. And then the door opened, not with a knock, not with a heads up, but with Austin and some HR clones stepping in like they'd walked into a Best Buy looking for a refund. No preamble, no warning, just Austin in a slim-fit blazer too tight for his ego, waving a red folder like it was a subpoena. "We're moving fast," he said, eyes scanning the room like he was already redecorating. "Effective immediately. You're done. Hand over the controls." That's the thing about people who've never actually built anything. They think power lives in passwords and screens. They think control is something you can hand over like a gym locker key. Austin had no idea what he was touching. He had no idea what the word control actually meant in that room. I stood up slowly, like someone rising from a chessboard after placing the final piece. Not angry, not shaken, just still. I reached up, unplugged my security token from the port on the back panel, and let the quiet pop echo across the room like a hammer drop. I took off my lanyard, peeled my badge from the clip, and placed both on the table. Then I looked at him, right in the eyes, and gave him the line I'd rehearsed just once, a few years back after the first reorg that almost erased my contract. I'm afraid I can't do that. HR's breath hitched. Austin blinked like he'd misheard me. I didn't repeat it. Just turned and walked out past the cabling racks, past the chilled air and the blinking core nodes still alive behind me. The door closed on his stunned silence. I didn't have to say anything else. My access token was already deactivated the moment I unplugged it, which meant the scheduler module, the inventory relay, and the partner billing nodes were now sealed behind encryption layers that couldn't be rotated without my dual key. And since Austin hadn't planned for a transitional handoff, hadn't even thought to ask, I knew what would happen next. They'd try to log in, they'd fail. Then they'd call IT, and ET would stall because no one had touched the root certs in 5 years. Then they'd call legal, and legal would start combing the archives and finding my name buried in every line of ownership under Stonelight Ops LLC, and only then. When the dashboard lights stopped updating, when the queue manager threw its first fatal alert when the system felt my absence, only then would Austin start to sweat. But I didn't see any of that. I walked out into the rain, no umbrella, no bag, just me, one USB drive in my pocket, and 7 years of precision that didn't need a loud goodbye. Control doesn't need noise, it just needs absence. And they were about to feel every second of mine. The first warning shot hit at 3:17 a.m., about 14 hours after I walked out. I wasn't watching the system logs. I didn't need to. I knew how I built the heartbeat protocols, the ops core checks for continuity every 90 minutes. Miss 3? The failover sequence locks the interfaces behind certificate-based auth and enters protected freeze. Not shutdown, not crash. Freeze, the difference matters. Crash is chaos. Freeze is surgical. The system was designed to survive without noise, just long enough to let the right people feel the silence. At 3:17 a.m., the queue manager stopped accepting pushes. 47 API syncs flagged yellow. Then, the order scheduler missed its next block and flipped red. They didn't call me, of course, not at first. That would have looked like defeat. Instead, they called IT. Poor Sanjay, probably dragged out of bed and shoved in front of a blinking dashboard with Austin breathing down his neck like a toddler with a steering wheel. From what I later heard, they tried restoring from a previous build. Didn't work. Tried accessing the sync queue through the sandbox instance. Blocked. Even tried doing a direct override using old CTO credentials. Those had been revoked 2 years ago. And that's when they hit the wall. The scheduler module, inventory sync, customer billing routes, everything critical was routed through a central logic core behind my personal admin cert, a cert that could only be revoked through mutual key rotation, and the idiot had disabled mutual key protocols during his so-called cut over to Quoranet, because in his words, we need to simplify ops, too many people with too many keys. He'd centralized everything into a mirror, but cut off the only hand that could unlock it. By 8 a.m., I imagine AT had moved from troubleshooting to praying. Legal finally got involved around 10. Their verdict? A minor licensing snag. They called it that like you'd call a severed fuel line a mileage hiccup. What it really was? A full-on blackout. The ops team had to watch in real time as region syncs began to decay. Batch processing collapsed, and, most insultingly, there was nothing they could do about it. No error message to fix, no password to reset. Just a closed door, sealed by a contract no one bothered to read. Clause 9C, IP remains property of consultant unless full rights are purchased or revoked via signed mutual dissolution. No such dissolution existed, and that meant my code was still mine. The systems they depended on? Still mine. The heartbeat protocols that were now dormant across 4 time zones? All mine. Austin called it legacy glue. That was the phrase he used. He didn't realize that glue was the only thing holding the machine together, and now that it was gone, all he had left were pieces falling out of sync. They tried copying the configs into the new cloud framework, but it wouldn't stick. Because the licensing core wasn't software, it was legal architecture embedded deep and authorized by 3 CTOs, AGO under my firm's name. The APIs were still technically functional, but without the routing logic in the frozen scheduler, every endpoint returned timeouts. They couldn't even send a basic shipping update without triggering a sync error. At 2:45 p.m., the obvious lead called in an emergency session, not because of internal pressure, but because one of our biggest fulfillment partners had already flagged a major sync delay. I'd warned them, in writing. If the key layer is altered without mutual protocol, architecture will self-isolate. They thought I was bluffing. But I don't bluff, I just plan. And the lights were going out, one node at a time. By Wednesday morning, Austin was visibly unraveling. Gone was the swagger, the blazer, the smug pacing in meetings. He looked like a man who'd confidently kicked down a door only to find a bear on the other side. And now the bear was pissed and had a paper trail. Legal had started their dig. Quietly at first, like maybe they could find a workaround buried in some outdated SLA or forgotten policy. But the deeper they went, the colder it got. Because the trail didn't lead to a back door, it led to me. They pulled my contract out of the archive vault. Physical folder, signatures in blue ink, witness initials, appendix tabs. Clause 9C, buried halfway through Section 4. Architectural core intellectual property shall remain under the ownership of the consultant unless full rights are purchased and documented through mutually signed dissolution of contract. Simple, unambiguous, ironclad, and no such dissolution existed. The contract had been renewed quietly every 2 years without disruption. Because no one had ever thought I'd leave. I wasn't just the architect. I was the continuity. CTOs came and went, but I stayed. I became the institutional memory they never backed up. And it got worse for Austin. Because deeper in the addendums, a clause flagged by legal's own paralegal sent the entire ops team into freefall. A binding control stipulation that required my explicit signature before any third-party system could be granted administrative control over the live environment. No signature, no handoff, no access. They could build a replica, sure. They could diagram and guess, but they couldn't touch the heartbeat protocols, the sync map, or the core scheduler that governed client-side coordination. It was like trying to hotwire a locked car with no engine, and every time they pushed a button, it just beeped louder. I later heard that Austin tried to argue the clause was unenforceable because it was from a prior administration. Legal didn't laugh. They just slid over the master contract chain. Every CTO since Corey had affirmed the clause. Every renewal, every board acknowledgement, every operational handover memo had retained the structure, and every legal update had left it untouched. The OPS team started asking questions they should have asked weeks earlier, like, why wasn't this reviewed during replatform planning? Or, who approved revoking mutual key rotation without transitional coverage? My name came up a lot. So did Stonelight Ops LLC. That's when panic started moving from the server logs into the boardroom. Because the legal fortress wasn't just written in ink, it was written in architecture. Every system they'd come to depend on had failover protections, sure. But those failovers reported to a validation module gated by my cert. And now that the system had entered self-isolation, nothing could move until I said so. I wasn't holding it hostage. I wasn't asking for ransom. I was simply following protocol. A protocol they had agreed to 3 CTOs ago, and in 7 years, no one had thought to change it. Not because they couldn't, but because they trusted me. Austin didn't. He thought he could erase me from the org chart and inherit the keys. But the architecture didn't care about titles. It cared about signatures, and mine wasn't there. So while the sync errors multiplied, while the operations team started routing tickets by hand, while partner SLAs began flashing red, Austin stood there, blinking, stunned by a single truth. He hadn't fired an employee. He'd locked himself out of his own system. And the key? That was still in my pocket. It was Thursday morning when the dam started to crack in public view. Procurement flagged the first breach, a $12.6 million stall in deployment fees. The third-party vendor, Quoranet, had sent over their standard provisioning team expecting open access, like this was any other corporate migration. Instead, they hit a wall of revoked certs, blank command paths, and error messages that read like they were written in spite. Cannot authenticate administrative schema. Missing parent signature token. They thought it was a glitch. It wasn't. The vendor escalated. Trencor's procurement team tried overriding through purchase order amendments, even attempted to backdoor a license validation using test environments. But the system wasn't coded for workarounds. It was coded for clarity. And clarity in this case meant hard lines. Without mutual revocation, the scheduler core was untouchable. Finance started asking on procurement why payments were being processed for services that hadn't launched. Legal flagged the issue up the chain. Again. This time, the clause wasn't treated like a curious oversight. It was read aloud in a board prep call like scripture, word for word, until Austin's face apparently drained of color. I wasn't on the call. I didn't need to be. My contract was doing the talking now. Meanwhile, Trencor's largest logistics partner, Global Path Freight, sent a quiet but deadly message. Platform unsynced. SLA breach in 24 hours. That was code for, fix this immediately or penalties activate. And with our routing scheduler frozen, they couldn't verify warehouse batch numbers, couldn't align delivery syncs, couldn't confirm multi-node shipments across international zones. I knew it would come. I had spent years refining that sync layer, built it to self-throttle if fed inconsistent data. A safety mechanism, one I documented a dozen times, but now it was activated by incompetence, not disaster. Global Path gave them a deadline. 24 hours. That meant Friday at noon. 1 minute passed, and the penalties would hit like a hammer. And I was busy, yes, just not with them. While Austin ran in circles, while legal buried itself in the very paper trail I'd built for this moment, my firm, Stonelight Ops LLC, filed a simple, clean update with the regional tech regulator. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. One line. Change of control advisory per section 18. That phrase meant something to those who knew. It meant the architect of record had stepped away from system oversight, that the license owner was no longer under active engagement. It also signaled potential operational instability for any connected partners, triggering quiet alerts across the supply chain, red flags that didn't say panic, but said pay attention. Vendors noticed, auditors noticed. That's when the inbound calls began, not to Trencor, but to me. A compliance officer from one of our security cert agencies reached out, purely procedural, asking for clarification about the advisory. A data integrity consortium pinged my firm's help desk about infrastructure replication rights. Even Global Path sent a veiled inquiry about consulting services. Should expertise be required under alternate conditions? Alternate conditions. I liked that. By Friday morning, the company was no longer trying to fix the system. They were trying to understand it. Austin stopped holding meetings. The founder had been briefed. Rumor was, the board wanted an independent review of the ops layer, but there was no independent, just me. Every line of sync logic, every dependency rule, every SLA alert cascade, I'd written it. I'd bound it to the architecture. I'd bound it legally to myself. They could scream, panic, escalate, threaten, but systems don't respond to emotion, they respond to design. And the system? It was responding exactly as I intended. Austin tried to call around 6:40 a.m. on Friday. His number lit up twice on my second line before I blocked it. No voicemail, no message, just the panic of a man realizing the map doesn't match the territory, and the person holding the compass no longer works for him. A few hours later, a sharp email came through from their outside counsel. Polite tone, heavy with desperation. They were requesting clarification on prior licensing constraints and potential reassignment pathways. My attorney at Weller & Lott replied within the hour, "Our client is under no further obligation. Per Clause 9C, IP remains the property of Stonelight Ops LLC. No reassignments are authorized, no advisory agreement exists." That was it. A 2-paragraph coffin lid on Austin's last remaining fantasy of salvaging control. The fallout began leaking beyond the firewall. No press yet, but insiders talk. Partner firms started whispering. Questions floated around back channels like smoke. Did you hear about the OPS lockout at Trencor? Something about legacy ownership. Didn't she used to build their core system? My name popped up more than once. So did the name Rivitron Systems. A whisper at first, then louder. I wasn't trying to gloat, but the momentum has its own gravity. Rivitron had just landed a federal logistics contract, a massive tender for a Department of Transportation automation overhaul. And their new backend, it hummed, clean, fast, stable. It didn't crash under dynamic load, it didn't bleed errors during batch reconciliation. It looked familiar, because it should have. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't lifted a single byte from Trencor. What I'd done was simple. I architected better. I used everything I'd learned over 7 years of watching my own code keep a brittle empire from collapsing. Then I rewrote it cleaner, smarter, and leaner for someone who actually listened. Rivitron had approached me months ago, quietly, just exploratory at first. "We're scaling fast," their COO had said. "We don't want someone to manage operations. We want someone to own them." I didn't commit. Not then. But I laid groundwork. Parallel paths. It was just due diligence until Austin made the choice for me. And when he did, I already knew what came next. I wasn't boasting. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I didn't send gloating texts. What I did do, what I always do, was move pieces behind the scenes quietly, precisely. Stonelight filed a second advisory with the tech regulator. Routine again. This time, architectural engagement initiated with Rivitron Systems, effective immediately. Another formality, another signal for those watching closely. The procurement heads at Trencor weren't watching, but their clients were. Global Path sent a notice of pending review to Trencor's compliance lead. NetBridge Partners? Pause the upcoming integration release. Their silence said it all. No one bets on a platform with no owner. The irony? Austin still thought the issue was technical. He still believed he could code his way out or hire some DevOps team to break the lock. But it was never about code. It was about control. And I don't reclaim control with threats. I reclaim it with leverage, with timing, with execution. While Austin was scrambling for lawyers, I was drafting a transition architecture with Rivitron's CTO. While Trencor's board debated audit paths, I was mapping a seamless rollout plan for an ops core that wouldn't need constant CPR. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or raise voices. It simply shifts. And by Friday night, it had shifted entirely. They called it an emergency realignment session, but everyone knew it was a funeral. Friday, 4 p.m., 11th floor boardroom, the mahogany coffin room where careers either floated or burned. I wasn't there, obviously, but I had friends who were, people who owed me quiet favors, people who still understood where the real bones were buried. The founder, Everett Trenholm himself, finally made an appearance. He hadn't set foot in an ops meeting in 3 years, preferred yacht retreats and foundation galas to infrastructure updates. But even he couldn't ignore the red flags anymore. Not after procurement, compliance, and legal all started bleeding into the same risk log. He arrived looking confused. Maybe even hopeful, like this would be a minor hiccup, a technical snafu that could be patched over with a few apologies and an expensive consultant. He didn't yet know the engine had been ripped out and tossed off a cliff. Legal went first. They kept it clinical, precise. No emotion, just impact. Unless Ms. Vance reinstates control or grants transitional authority, they said, we will default across all synchronized partners within 10 business days. That includes Global Path, NetBridge, Skytrack Customs, and Huron Medfreight. Each of those has SLA penalties ranging from $2.5 to $4.7 million per breach, per cycle. The air went cold. Someone tried to speak, but legal cut in again. The architecture was never legally transferred. Our internal review confirms Clause 9C is intact and enforceable. Furthermore, per Addendum 2B, no third-party rehost may proceed without her direct signature. The attempted deployment by Quoranet lacks operational authority and is currently in violation of regulatory disclosure rules. The word violation landed like a brick. Then came the slide, the one with the timeline, each missed sync, each blackout, each unanswered partner inquiry. The board absorbed it in silence, eyes bouncing between charts and contract text and the little red banner at the bottom that read, "No administrative cert on file." Everett leaned forward, slow. He looked like a man realizing too late that the fire wasn't just on the horizon, it was under his chair. "Wait," he said, "she still holds the license?" The legal team nodded once, and has not agreed to release it. A long pause. Then he turned, full swivel in his chair, to face Austin. "Did you fire the license holder?" The silence after that wasn't just awkward. It was biblical. You could hear shirt fabric shift, hear someone set down a pen too hard. Austin didn't answer right away. He looked down, tried to shuffle a page, but his hands were shaking. Her role was operationally redundant." Everett just stared. then blinked, then said 2 words, soft but sharp. Get out. Austin didn't argue, didn't stammer, just stood, gathered his tablet, and walked out with the gait of a man who finally understood what he'd broken. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't make eye contact. One of the junior board members whispered something about succession planning, but Everett raised a hand. The conversation was over. For years, I'd been invisible in that room. A line item, a box to check, a reliable cog in the machine. Now, my absence was the story. No speech, no vengeance, just consequence. And in the echo of that boardroom, they all finally heard it. It happened quietly. Not with a press release or a flashy keynote or some corporate puff piece about innovation through disruption. Just a footnote in a quarterly regulatory filing. Rivetron Systems appoints Eleanor Vance as Chief Operations Architect, effective immediately. No interview, no photo op, just a name, a role, and a timestamp. But for the people who mattered, that line landed like a thunderclap. Within hours, their homepage changed. Barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Down in the footer, next to the compliance badges and partner logos, a new line of code appeared in muted gray text, powered by Stonelight. No flourish, no fanfare, just a fingerprint. That same afternoon, Trencor's stock dropped 11% before noon, then another 12% by close. By the end of the week, they were down 23%, and the phones in procurement were ringing off the hook, not with orders, but with cancellations. Not loud, just steady. Global Path issued a formal statement announcing a strategic reassessment of systems alignment. Huron Medfreight switched their integration priority to alternate vendor pathway. Even NetBridge, who had been with Trencor for a decade, paused their Phase 2 rollout and began exploratory conversations with other providers. They weren't chasing me. They were following the architecture, and the architecture had moved. Inside Rivetron, I was already rebuilding. Cleaner, faster, smarter. The same core principles I'd honed in silence for 7 years, but this time with full autonomy. No boardroom skeptics, no swaggering MBA nephews, just code, trust, and results. I didn't need to say a word. Austin, from what I heard, was gone. No LinkedIn update, no goodbye memo, just a scrubbed nameplate, a few broken Slack threads, and a reputation left dangling in the space between arrogance and consequence. Some said he went west. Others said he joined a startup in Seattle under an alias. I didn't care. He had walked into a house he didn't build, set fire to the foundation, and acted surprised when it collapsed under him. And Clause 9C, still active, still ironclad, still mine. The board never tried to challenge it. They couldn't. The language was too clean. The chain of renewals too tight. The ownership structure too well fortified. They could scream about loyalty or legacy or hurt feelings, but contracts don't feel. They only hold. I never raised my voice, never made a scene, never posted a single line of defense on social media because I didn't need to fight for control. I designed it. And when it was time to go, I took it with me.